right, so let's go to our next event. We're now going to talk about the Battle in Varna, which happened on November 10th, 1444.
And this is our Byzantine Eastern Roman Empire topic.
Yes, and let's just kind of set the scene a little bit here.
Set it up.
The Byzantine Empire is already at its smallest. At this point, there have been a whole slew of invasions. The empire really had to withstand invasions, including from the Crusaders. It was bad enough that the Ottoman Empire was attacking, but we had the Crusaders as well. Let's not forget.
Crusaders in 1204 sacked Constantinople and basically destroyed its economic power and prestige for quite some time.
Absolutely. And a very difficult situation to be in Europe, especially in the Balkan area, and obviously Byzantium. So and also we have the Venetians are active already. So some land already which is Greek land, which belonged to the Byzantine Empire, is actually no longer it's already under occupation, but it's under occupation by a Christian government. And those areas, those dominions are also under threat of by the Ottomans. So now Europe is in a very difficult position. They're trying to basically hold on from this tremendous onslaught from the east, which has already been majorly shaking things up, right?
Yes, we have the last dynasty, the Paleologus dynasty, that rules Byzantium for the last 200 years, starting from 1261 after they retake Constantinople from the Latins. And this is the last basically 10 years of the empire, which is based around Constantinople. So we mentioned there were Latin Crusaders that attacked via Venetian interference, that they brought the Frankish knights instead of to the Holy Lands to Constantinople. But now we're seeing a different shift in what's happening in Europe. They're realizing there is a threat. The Turks, the Muslim Ottoman armies are coming. It's possible that they're going to take over all of the Balkans and eventually come to Central Europe, and there's a possibility that they can get them off Europe and wipe them out once and for all. I mean, there is a slight possibility. What George was just saying, though, is the Turks have circled Constantinople. They run most of mainland Greece, northern Greece. Only the Morea, the Peloponnese in the south is under Byzantine control of Constantinople. The Despotate of Epirus runs across the Dalmatian and Ionian coasts, and the Empire of Trebizond. Those are the three Greek kingdoms. And then there's Venetian possessions, the islands, and other holdings that the Venetians have.
Yeah, which is again Greek territory that's occupied by the Venetians.
And other Frankish states like French knights and duchies and stuff like that. So basically, it's a very small empire we're seeing right now that's basically based around the city-state of Constantinople. It's not an empire per se, but it's still prestigious, Constantinople and the Byzantine Empire. It's still important. They're still going through a renaissance in theology and the arts. And there are two possible things that could have happened. One was if the Turks were repelled, Byzantium, as a smaller state, basically more around what modern Greece is now, would have evolved as a new Hellenic state, or it would be no more. Those are the two options they had. And at this Battle of Varna, now what happens is the Hungarian king, the kingdom, was basically one of the front lines of what the Turks were going to go next for Europe. So as for the bigger European kingdoms, the Hungarians were the first in line. Now the Balkans were the Greeks, the Serbs, Bulgarians, and other people, right? And the Romanians to the north. So those were the targets for the Turks as well. So the Serbians made a deal under George Brankovic with the Turks to do a truce, and the Romanians for 10 years. So they kind of were able to pay off and gain some territory and have some respite from the Turks. And that's what actually gave the incentive to the Pope of the time to lead a crusade. But this was a crusade to save Constantinople and to stop the Ottoman Turks. And what is not as well known that we kind of were discussing before and we want to actually talk a little bit about is there was a secret society of Christian Balkan Knights that have been playing a role for the last over 100 years in this part of the world that were sworn to protect Constantinople and the Byzantine Empire.
Right.
Right. And this is where things are tying up right now. And that's why there is some interest from the West to protect Constantinople because they're under the sway of this organization. And this organization is going to play a key role in gathering whatever left is of Christendom to stop the Ottoman Turks. All right. What's the name of the organization?
The Order of the Dragon.
That's right.
Order of the Dragon, right? Something familiar for some people, I'm sure.
It's the Order of the Dragon of St. George. And it began at another famous battle years earlier, at the Battle of Kossovo.
Right.
In 1389, that's when the Serbian princes fought and killed the Sultan of the time. But they lost. Prince Stephen Lazarevic escapes, one of the, I believe, 12 princes that were fighting at the Battle of Kosovo. He's the only survivor and goes to Hungary. And then the king of the time in Hungary, he's the one that restarts the Order of the Dragon. And its aim is to protect and stop the Ottoman Turks as a united Christian front of Orthodox and Catholics, and to protect Constantinople to a certain extent. All right. And this is one of the key battles right now, many, many decades later, at the Battle of Varna, that they unite the Poles, the Hungarians, the Romanians, the Wallachians, and other peoples of the area to stop the Ottoman army of Murad II. That's Mehmed the Conqueror's father.
Right. And I think it's important to also point out this was a secret society, so there's not, there's not as much in-depth information maybe as we'd like to know about certain details of it. But it's it's a very interesting subject, and one that I think we will, of course, find time to revisit.
Yeah, unfortunately, they do lose. King Vladislav of Hungary and Poland dies at the battle, and this is actually very bad for the Christians, because now the Ottomans have an advantage to and a momentum to bring themselves farther into the Balkans, and that's what's unfortunately is going to seal the fate for Constantinople. But the Order of the Dragon does rise up a few more times, and definitely one right after the fall of Constantinople, and that deals with Vlad the Impaler, with Vlad Dracula. So a lot of the nobility and philosophers and the priests that flee Constantinople prior to 1453. In that century, they start leaving to go to Venice and the West. And one of the princesses that leave, that's from the most noble family of Constantinople, is Anna Notaras in 1453. Palaiologos gives her the okay to leave and take books with her. The knowledge of Constantinople, and she's the one that starts the first diaspora Greek community in Venice, and it takes many decades to even form the first Orthodox church, their cathedral. But she's the one that initiates that, and then also brings about, with people that were before her, the Renaissance to
Right.
Europe. Now, what's very interesting, records of her kind of vanish between 1453 and 1459 while she's in Venice, and she reappears in the records in 1459 while the Pope at the time, Pope Pius II, issues another crusade for Constantinople. And we kind of believe that it was also because of Anna's influence that this was, instigated. Pope Pius II, address September 26, 1459. In the royal city of the East, they have slain the successor of Constantine and his people, desecrated the temples of the Lord, defiled the noble church of Justinian with their Mohammedan abominations. Each success of the Islamic Sultan will be only a stepping stone to the next until he has mastered all the Western monarchs, overthrown the Christian faith, and imposed the law of his false prophet on the whole world. Unfortunately, as we learned many times through our history, the Russians had their own problems, civil wars. They had the Mongols. The Western Europeans had other wars and infighting, and they were not as enthusiastic now that Constantinople has fallen. This is about 5 years later, to recapture the great city. But there was still hope, and Anna Notaras and a lot of the nobles were only temporary refugees. They were not there to stay for long. Their goal was to get help and go back and reclaim Constantinople, because
Right.
there was still a chance. So there is a crusade for Constantinople that happens in 1459, and the one that answers it very enthusiastically is Vlad the Impaler
Right.
of Wallachia, the famous Vlad Dracula, who hated the Turks. His family was destroyed by them. He was kidnapped. He was held for ransom. With his brother, became a lover of Mehmed. I mean, he had a lot of hatred for the Turks and what they did to his people and to his land. And he was an Orthodox prince. He was not a vampire. That's just a myth that happened later. That has nothing to do with Vlad. Bram
Stoker took some tremendous liberties with history,
Yeah.
putting it mildly, and
So his father took the name of Dracula from the Order of the Dragon. That's how important that was to their family. And Vlad the Impaler also was Dracula. And he swore an allegiance to the Order of the Dragon to protect Constantinople and Christendom.
right.
Right? So he went to fight for Constantinople, but that, unfortunately, that was also another campaign that was lost. And the eventual conquest of all the Christian lands in the Balkans, continued on. Many other of the enclaves fell. The Empire of Trebizond fell in 1461. That's the Pontian Kingdom. The Epirotian Kingdom of the Despotate of Epirus fell in 1459. Athens, and then the Morea, the Peloponnese, a little bit later. So, unfortunately, it's a sad ending, but the Battle of Varna was the last united Christian crusade to stop the Ottoman Turks for Constantinople.
Right.
There's others that's going to happen later with Charles Martel and Sobieski from Poland, and they will stop the Turks in farther out in the Balkans, about 100 years later. But this was the important one prior to the fall of Constantinople. All right, so that's the Order of the Dragon. That's the Battle of Varna. And a little bit about Vlad Dracula, Vlad the Impaler for you.